This is KGW News at 5.
And welcome to the News at 5, a major milestone today in the fight against COVID-19 across the country. Look at this, delivery trucks carrying the first doses of Pfizer's COVID vaccine. They rolled up to hospitals, and healthcare workers on the front lines helping treat patients will be the first people vaccinated. In some states, they're already getting the shots, and the second wave of doses left Pfizer's factories this morning. Unbelievable to see that video. Thank you for joining us. I'm Maggie Vespa. I'm in for Laurel Porter tonight, and clearly coming to you from one of our remote studios because I've covered stories lately that involved crowds, so we're just being extra cautious here at KGW. Our top headline, obviously, the first vials of the vaccine against COVID-19 are in Oregon right now, and more are arriving tomorrow. It's the beginning of an effort to vaccinate more than 3 million people to stop the spread of the virus. KGW's Pat Doris reports.
After months of waiting, the new vaccine is finally here. It's starting just as a trickle, not nearly enough for the 3 million or more people who need it. But the government says a lot more is soon to follow. A special delivery arrived today in Portland on a FedEx plane. 2 containers of the Pfizer vaccine against COVID-19, 975 doses each, the first in Oregon. One set went to Legacy's Holiday Park location, the other to Meridian Park in Tualatin. Oregon Governor Kate Brown celebrated the shipment in a video message released by her office.
I've said time and time again that hope is on the way. Today, I can tell you that help is here.
In Boise, workers unpacked their super cold shipment at St. Alphonsus Medical Center. A similar shipment of 975 doses will arrive at the Ontario Hospital tomorrow. Frontline medical workers will get their first rounds of shots later this week. Back in Portland, the VA Medical Center is expecting nearly 3,000 doses to arrive on Wednesday. These are just the very first arrivals. More than 19,000 additional doses will arrive at Portland area hospitals throughout the rest of the week, and 10,000 doses will go to skilled nursing facilities. More shipments are expected to follow in the weeks ahead.
Pat Doris, KGW News.
All right, let's go up to Washington now. They also got their first shipments of the vaccine this morning. This is video from UW Medical Center in Seattle. They are expecting more than 62,000 doses in this first round, and those doses will go first to high-risk health workers and staff and residents at long-term care facilities. That will start as soon as tomorrow, and by the end of the month, Washington expects to have 222,000 doses of the vaccine. And now more than ever, you probably know this, it's important to know the facts about vaccines because there is so much misinformation being spread on social media and frankly by word of mouth. So our own Christine Pitawanich looked into everything that state leaders may have to consider as they take on this big vaccine campaign to alleviate fears and doubts.
Some out there are not comfortable getting the COVID-19 vaccine, but health and state leaders say in order to achieve mass immunity, a lot of people are going to have to get it.
That's why we're planning to do everything we can as we gear up for the vaccine campaign of our lifetimes.
That's Governor Kate Brown from last Friday. So how do you build up trust around a vaccine, and what's the strategy? To get some insight, we caught up with Portland State University Associate Professor Lauren Frank.
I specialize in public health communication. So what that means is I do a lot of health campaigns, both thinking about how to design them and how to evaluate whether or not they're effective.
Frank says vaccine campaigns are some of the most difficult. She says sometimes myth-busting can backfire.
As soon as I start talking about vaccines with things that people are worried about, what I'm doing is pairing those concepts more strongly in people's minds.
Instead, she says those working on the marketing campaign should focus on the positives and social benefits.
Things around how safe they are, the process for developing vaccines.
But the COVID-19 vaccine, she says, may be particularly challenging because it's become somewhat politicized. Frank says what's needed now, credible people like scientists and doctors leading the charge on the campaign, not politicians. And the message, she says, can't be one size fits all.
We know that there are differences for vulnerable racial and ethnic minorities in how much they are currently trusting the vaccine process.
And it appears the state is already thinking about that.
We will be launching an intensive and culturally responsive outreach effort to build trust and confidence in the vaccines, especially among communities of color and other vaccine hesitant communities.
Frank says the naming of the vaccine development process was also unfortunate. Operation Warp Speed. She says that has negative connotations that are now associated with the vaccine rollout. But while development was remarkably quick, Frank says the vaccines still went through all of the standard phases of clinical trials and testing. Christine Petawanich, KGW News.
So tonight, NBC Nightly News goes inside the massive logistical challenge of getting the vaccine from coast to coast. A big part of the vaccine distribution, get this, lies with UPS. So tonight, Gabe Gutierrez follows a shipment to see exactly how the critical cargo is transported, and he talks to a driver about being part of that process.
Well, I think it's a big moment for the country, and just to be a part of that and to make a delivery. You know, someday my kids will tell their kids that when the vaccine was released, I was there delivering it. It's pretty special.
That's really cool. Coming up on KGW News at 5:30, watch all on Nightly News, I should say, at 5:30 here on KGW, watch all the steps the vaccine takes before reaching the arms of frontline medical staff. And you might have seen, we have so much more on vaccines at kgw.com. We've been answering your questions and we've been following the latest developments. So just text the word vaccine, this is super easy, to 503-226-5088. Text it to that number and we'll send you a link to all the latest stories. Well, the massive vaccine campaign begins as the U.S. continues to see the worst of the pandemic. The country just passed 300,000 COVID-19 deaths. And here in Oregon, we can see this chart again. We've seen it throughout the pandemic. The state reported 6 more deaths today. And daily new cases remain high. Today, Oregon reported 1,180 new cases. This graph shows the continuing upward trend. The state also reporting, again, 6 new deaths. So far, more than 1,100 Oregonians have died since the pandemic began. All right, turning to presidential politics now, the Electoral College has voted to affirm President-elect Joe Biden's win. Oregon's and Washington's electors cast their votes for Biden this afternoon. California's electors officially put him over the count of 270, the one, of course, needed to win. The vote is typically a formality, but this year it required extra security in several battleground states, all because President Trump refuses to concede. He has made false claims of election fraud, and he has lost dozens of legal challenges, all the way up to the Supreme Court. All right, now to continuing coverage here at home of the illegal occupation of a property in North Portland. Barriers, check that out. They came down around the Red House on North Mississippi Avenue, where protesters camped out and blocked roads, basically trying to prevent an eviction. Portland's mayor says there is a resolution in the works between the family who owned the home for generations and the developer who bought it at an auction. Tim Gordon has more from North Mississippi Avenue.
We saw signs of change over the weekend at the Red House on Mississippi Avenue in North Portland. Occupiers and supporters brought down some barricades and cleaned up graffiti in places. Monday, the mayor announced an agreement in principle between the previous owners and the developer who bought the property in foreclosure. Wheeler said his office is helping.
The Kinney family is waiting for legal advice, and we have extended to them a list of attorneys that they can use for the closure of this project. But my understanding is this is on track.
The developer who bought the foreclosed property said he'd consider selling the home back to the Kinney family. Kinney supporters put out a statement saying, in part, while the Kinneys haven't yet heard from Roman Ozaruga to begin negotiations, the fact that he's come forward to media outlets does promise one thing for sure: he's feeling the heat. The heat was definitely up at the Red House just about a week ago, when deputies moved in to clear it and made several arrests before being pushed back. Mayor Wheeler says the tension and danger were high.
And the Portland Police Bureau made it very clear to me up front that this was the highest risk situation that police officers could ever find themselves in.
Despite occupiers armed with paintball guns and a roadblock continuing, this is a quieter scene now. People came to check it out, and while a couple told us off camera they don't agree with the occupation, more wanted to publicly support it.
Or people are willing to fight for what they believe in, and I think that's great, especially in Portland and America.
I feel like it's a reasonable show of force. I've seen the police do worse things.
And one supporter predicted this won't be the last occupation of its kind.
I think this is a really good learning opportunity for what we're going to have to keep doing to prevent people from being evicted.
The mayor is not in favor of that.
The way you resolve conflict is not to occupy an area, particularly with the use of firearms, and then demand that you get everything you want. That is not a negotiation. That is extortion.
So while there may be progress being made, obviously it's not a done deal. The road's still blocked to vehicles and the property's still occupied. The mayor says there's no deadline at this point for that to end. In North Portland, Tim Gordon, KGW News.
All right, and we will continue to follow new developments in this story as we have been. And speaking of, if you want more background on the Kinney family, on how that all started, all of the above, check out our coverage at kgw.com.